Hello, everyone, and welcome to Uncivil Law, where we learn through the misfortunes of others. As always, I hope you'll enjoy this legal education content, and today will be the day I earn your subscription. For today's coverage, we're going to do a brief discussion of a Twitter exchange I recently had with a person who followed me. Now, I want to make very clear right at the outset that I'm not intending to beat up on this person because they made a mistake, and it's a fairly common mistake that people make. They overread a definition in a statute. They applied it in an incorrect way, but it's a common mistake. And so this point of this exercise is for me to show you how you should correctly read something, okay? Not to beat up on this particular person. Okay. All right. So let's do that. Excuse me. All right. So this all begins in the context of a thread relating to the COVID-19 vaccine, which is always a popular topic, I'm sure. And here is what the exchange started at. And I feel like I have to give the overall context. There we go. All right, so this starts with Robert Barnes, and he says, if you believe Russia has lost more soldiers in a month than a decade in Afghanistan, you're probably one of those folks who still thinks the vaccine, which I assume he means COVID-19 vaccine, because what other possible vaccine could it be referring to, actually vaccinate people. So without taking a position on the first claim about whether Russia has lost more soldiers in a month or not, because I don't have a particular position on that particular issue, I did take the position that the vaccine actually vaccinates people, right? And because it does in the way I understand a vaccine, right? I do not understand a vaccine to require 100% efficacy, right? And a vaccine does not mean that it works 100% of the time or 100% of cases. I don't think there's any vaccine in the history of time that's ever worked 100% of the time or 100% of cases, right? A vaccine helps to prevent a vaccine, and I go into a definition of what a vaccine is for the purposes of this exercise, but it just makes you more resistant to it to some degree, right? It doesn't necessarily have to work 100% of the time or any particular percentage of time to be a vaccine. Whether or not it's a good vaccine might require it to be, work a certain percentage of the time or not, but it still is a vaccine if it produces the results that you're looking for, in my view, right? So that's what I said. So I think the vaccine actually vaccinated people, right? Because I think it worked at least some of the time. And then someone notes it's like the flu vaccine. It helps but doesn't wipe out influenza, to which I say, correct. Also, like the flu vaccine, it's not 100% effective and might have to be renewed to be effective. People seem to think that vaccine has to be reduced in infection to zero and or work forever, which is not a requirement of the term vaccine as I understand it. And then someone tried to change the topic by saying, just give it to people and heart attacks and blood clots are totally worth it, which is a totally different issue, which I point out, right? So don't move the goalpost. The question at the moment is whether it's a vaccine at all. And the only question I've attempted to answer so far, right? I've not attempted to answer the question of whether or not it's good or not. The question of whether it is a vaccine is distinct from the question of whether it has side effects and whether those side effects are justifiable, right? So I wasn't trying to answer that question, so it's not relevant to this dispute. So then they said, and this is where their misunderstanding comes from and why we're doing this entire thread, right? So they ask, I will ask, is an aspirin a vaccine? Now they're asking this question for a very specific reason, because they're making a mistake, I think, or at least someone's making a mistake. And so I said, here's the definition of vaccine I provided. And incidentally, I got this from the Congressional Research Service, which seemed as good as any. A vaccine is a biological preparation that contains small amount of weak, dead, or modified disease-causing agents known as antigens, which can include virus, bacteria, fractions of these agents, or toxins that they produce. Thus, under that definition, aspirin is not a vaccine. All right, and then, yeah. All right, so then, let me remove this and into this other screen for a second. So I have to stop. This is one of the things about StreamYard. It's not really great on the screen management because you have to change screens and add screens, and it can be a little bit problematic, right? All right, but we'll get there one step at a time. It's fine. Is that the one I want? I don't know. Let's find out. I think this is the one I want. All right, so we're kind of in this thread. All right, so here's where a mistake. This is where Brian M makes a mistake and why we're here in this first place, right? And this might be related to the aspirin question, maybe because it's from a different user, but maybe there's a common mistake, right? So this guy Brian M, who's making a mistake, says no, there's a legal definition for vaccine. It's generic. Like most admin law, regulatory agencies' guidance is used to create or something how to achieve, interpret, enforce compliance with more generic definitions. True enough as far as it goes. And here's where he makes a mistake. He cites 26 USC 4132A2. And he cites it for this following proposition. Vaccine. The term vaccine means any substance designed to be administered to a human being for the prevention of one or more diseases. And they says, see how generic that is? A goddamn multivitamin could be argued to fall within that definition, hence agency guidance, right? So he says, look, there's a statute, 26 USC 4132A2. It defines vaccine, and it says the term vaccine means any substance designed to be administered to a human being for the prevention of one or more diseases. And then, yeah, under that definition, you could probably argue a multivitamin fits that definition, right? That's a pretty wide definition of the term vaccine. So if that's the definition of vaccine, right, that's a pretty wide definition. But of course, it's not the definition of vaccine. And that brings us to the whole reason we're doing this in the first place, because I want to show you where he made the mistake. All right, so we'll pull up the relevant US code and we'll teach you how to interpret statutes correctly, or help you interpret statutes correctly. So let me add this screen. Okay. So here is the relevant code, right? 26 USC 4132. And here's the definition he provides. Subsection A, subsection 2. All right. And this is exactly what it says. The term vaccine means any substance designed to be administered to a human being for the prevention of one or more diseases, right? It's right there in the US code. It's right there in the US code. That's what it says. The term vaccine means any substance designed to be administered to a human being for the prevention of one or more diseases. So how can you argue against that? Well, he made a mistake. And he made a mistake because what he needs to do, first thing, is figure out what the scope of this thing is, right? And so to figure out that, we can just start out by going to the top of the thing, And then if we go to the subsection A, we see the critical words that he missed. For the purposes of this subchapter. For the purposes of this subchapter are the critical words he missed, right? Because this is all subsection A, definitions relating to taxable vaccines for the purposes of the subsection. Subsection 1, subsection 2. For the purposes of this subchapter. So that's where he makes the mistake, because he is applying this and he thinks, oh, this is a universal definition. It's not. It's only for the purposes of this subchapter. And it gets even a little bit worse than that, because as it turns out, it doesn't even really matter, right? Because this is providing definitions for the purposes of the subchapter. Now, there's only one other section in this entire subchapter, by the way. There's only one other section in this entire subchapter, and we're going to talk about that a little bit now. Okay, 2131. We were just in 3132, and now we're in 3131. Imposition of a tax. There's hereby imposed a tax on a taxable vaccine sold by the manufacturer, producer, or importer thereof. And if you go down to C2, you can see if any taxable vaccine is described in more than one subparagraph of subsection A1, the amount tax imposed by it on such vaccine shall be the sum amounts for the vaccines that are included. Right? So the way this is written, the term vaccine only matters if it's first a taxable vaccine, because that's the way this reads. If any taxable vaccine is described in more than one subparagraph of A1, the amount of the tax imposed by subsection A on such vaccine shall be the sum of the amounts for the vaccines which are so imposed. So vaccine, the definition of vaccine only matters if it's first a taxable vaccine, right? So then you might want to know, okay, does taxable vaccine have a definition? And it sure does. And it's a lot more narrow, right? The term taxable vaccines means any of the following vaccines. Any vaccine containing diphtheria toxoid, any vaccine containing tetanus vaccine toxoid, any vaccine containing blah, 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 right? Just goes on to specify particular vaccines. So this definition, which at first looks really, really broad, right? This definition, which at first looks really, really broad because the term vaccine means any substance designed to be administered to a human being, only matters if it's first a taxable vaccine, and then it gives a specific list of vaccines. So that's just one of the things I wanted to note here, right? When you're interpreting statutory text, you have to first determine what the scope is and the scope of definitions. And the sovereign citizens make this mistake, by the way, fairly frequently, which is one of the reasons that I bring it to mind. Because I don't remember what subsection of the code is, nor for the purposes of this do I really care, right? But there's some subsection of the code somewhere which says that the United States is, the term corporation means, I forget exactly what it says, but says something along the lines of like, the term corporation means blah, 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 and then it says like any United States government corporation or whatever. And then the soft-sits take notice of this like sub thing that's like A5B2, right? And says, aha, it says the United States is a corporation. I'm like, no, it doesn't. It doesn't say anything like that. And then because it has the exact same problem, right? When you go back up to A or whatever it is, it says the same exact thing for the purposes of this subchapter, right? And then it goes on to define things that are relevant to when the United States is treated like a corporation for the purposes of whatever it is that they're administering. I forget, but it doesn't matter. But it doesn't mean the United States is a corporation. It's just treated the same as a corporation for the purposes of that particular subchapter, right? For the purposes of the subchapter. And the sovereign citizens do the exact same thing. So they drive me crazy. So yeah. The real Hydro PX says this is boring as F. This is, I don't know what to tell you, the real Hydro. This is just, I'm trying to show you a legal analysis. I'm trying to show you like someone made a mistake, and it's a common mistake. It's a mistake the sovereign citizens make. And it's a mistake you can make if you're Googling like a definition, right? If you're trying to find something in a CFR, you're trying to find something in the US code and you find a definition, you know, the first thing you have to figure out is like, what is the scope of this definition? So I thought it was good legal education, but you know, the real Hydro PX is apparently not so much, with it being good legal education. So I don't know. So yeah. So I thought it would be helpful to help people avoid making these mistakes. And if you see someone like a sovereign citizen or something who's quoting some provision of a statute that says, like, the United States is a corporation, go read it. And I guarantee you it's somewhere up in like, you know, it's going to be some subsection 5B3A. And somewhere in there, it's going to be for the purposes of this subchapter or for the purposes of this chapter or whatever it is, right? It's from some limited purpose. So it doesn't apply as universally as the definition might on first blush appear. So, you know, all that good stuff. So yeah, that's what I wanted to bring to your attention. No case du jour, just trying to show people how to interpret a statutory text, or for that matter, the CFR, because the CFR will do the same thing. The CFR, by the way, for those of you who might not know, the U.S. code is what Congress passes. The CFR is what the agencies pass, right? It's the code of federal regulations. So all the regulations all the regulations the agencies pass. So the CFR, if you want to know what an agency is doing or what their regulations are, that's where the CFR is. So it's arguably as important in some ways as the U.S. code. Of course, the CFR can't supersede and must bow to the U.S. code. So when definitions are clear, as they are here, right, there's no agency discretion, right? The FDA cannot just randomly define vaccine any way they want, right? Congress, for this purpose, has defined it exactly this. It's basically only one way to read it, and you're done. Low watermark says, gives me $20. What code has the definition of the woman for the purposes of Title IX? I'm not sure it does. to be honest, because I'm not sure anyone ever bothered to define it when they wrote it. Like, not everything in the US Code is defined. Congress, of course, can provide specific definitions, as we just saw, but that doesn't mean that they always do. It doesn't mean they always define their terms. Because, sometimes it's just, the term, it would just be the normal, ordinary, common understanding. So I'm not sure anything defines the term woman or sex in Title IX, because it's just the normal, ordinary dictionary definition when Congress wrote the term. So, yeah, that, yeah. Yeah. Under the code, then, the current vax is not listed as taxable. Correct. Right. It's not in that subsection. Correct. It is not listed in there, so it is not one of the taxable vaccines, at least for the purposes of that particular subchapter. Again, right? Because it could be somewhere else. It could be somewhere else, right? So you can't necessarily go to the conclusion that means the COVID-19 vaccine isn't taxable. The furthest conclusion you can possibly draw from what we read is that the COVID vaccine is not taxable for the purposes of 4131 and 4132. That's the only conclusion you can draw. If you reach the conclusion the COVID vaccine is not taxable, you have overread it, my friend, right? Because it might be somewhere else. And it might also, incidentally, not be in the US Code, because not everything is. Right? The US Code is just like it's the compilation of, I guess, what you might call the permanent laws. But everything Congress passes is a law, whether it's in the US Code or not. So there might be a law that's not even in the US Code that somewhere says, like, maybe Congress wrote it when they wrote something somewhere and just said, oh yeah, by the way, also COVID's taxable. And so even though it's not here, like, it might be in some bill somewhere. I don't know if it is or not. But you can't reach the conclusion that COVID vaccine is not taxable. It might be. It might be in the CFR. It might be somewhere else. It might be in some bill somewhere. I don't know. But don't overread what we're saying. It's like, I can tell you it's not taxable for the purposes of 4131 and 4132. And that's as much as I can tell you. That's as much as I can tell you. Yeah. What's a dog? What's a frog? I don't know the answers to these questions. Yeah. I'm not a biologist, right? I don't know. All right. I'm going to sign off for now. Yeah, I'm going to sign off for now. And because that's really all I want to do. Just do a quick little thing here on this story, just to show you how to do a statutory interpretation thing and try to make sure you don't overread things. And yeah. You're not a vet, but you know what a dog is? Well, yeah. But isn't laws not found easily and publicly disclosed? Laws that can't be enforced, so there's just no way to know about them easily. No. I mean, the CFR is, I can't think of any law. I mean, unless you're in some hyper specialized field. Like, if you're just an ordinary, common, normal person, every law that's going to impact you is in the US Code. Like, I can't think of any situation where there's some law that would impact you, especially with criminal exposure, that's not in the US Code. So unless you're in some specialized industry, in which case you have your lawyers to, pay attention to such things, it's not that problem. Of course, every act of Congress is public. So it's not like it's a secret. And people do keep track of it. And then, of course, even if you're not keeping track of it personally, then there's all the special interest groups or the trade associations or other sort of specialized groups. Like, there's trade associations and specialized associations for literally every possible domain, right? There are people whose main life and focus is the hyper niche that you didn't know existed, right? So there's definitely someone somewhere who is paying attention to such things and making it known, because it is their little pet issue, because it's what they love more than anything else in the world. So if it matters to you, it's probably being brought to your attention. I wouldn't worry about it too much if you're worried about things just being randomly in the US Code or randomly in some bill somewhere. Probably doesn't matter to you. If it does matter to you, it's probably being brought to your attention. Otherwise, I wouldn't worry about it too much. And everything is in the US Code that would impact you 99.9% of the time. So don't worry about it too much. Or of course in state codes, to the extent state law of course applies as well, right? So all that stuff, yeah. Oh yeah, the nerd for every occasion, yeah. A nerd for every occasion, exactly. Will Call Magic says I didn't feel interested in comment. I'm sorry, Will Call. Sometimes I get distracted. What did I miss? As I search. Under the code, then the current vaccine is not listed as taxable. I understand the EUA of it, which at this point is overused. Well, it's no longer EUA because it was approved by the FDA. At least some of the vaccines were. So like it's no longer under an EUA. I still don't believe the current vaccine qualifies as a vaccine. Well, if you don't believe it qualifies as a vaccine, then you're going to have to provide a definition of vaccine, right? What is your definition of vaccine? I provided one, incidentally. It's on my Twitter thread. We went over it, right? I stole my definition from the Congressional Research Service because it seemed as good as any. But if you don't think the current vaccine is a vaccine, okay, what do you think is the definition of a vaccine, right? If it's like, what is a woman, right? You have to define your term. It's like, okay, if you say it's not a vaccine, what is your definition of vaccine? That would exclude it. And, and then preferably, what is your authority for that would be nice. So that, you're not just pulling it out of your ass, but we'll take what we can get. Only one was approved and not being produced. That's not my understanding. My understanding is that the one that was approved is the same as the one is the EUA. The difference is in the packaging, but not the substance of it. So I think there's no like real distinction. What's the difference between a prima facie? It's not an attenuated virus vaccine. It's something new. Okay. Well, all right. Noted. In order to be a vaccine, it has to be an attenuated virus vaccine. Doesn't the very fact that you just said attenuated virus vaccine kind of necessarily make it more narrow than the term vaccine? Because unless the term vaccine means attenuated virus, in which case you don't have to specify it. But yeah. What's the difference between a prima facie and as applied challenge? Kind of what it says, right? If you're going to challenge something on its face, you're basically saying in every possible case, it's illegal or unconstitutional. If you're applying it as applied, you're saying as to you specifically, it's unconstitutional or illegal. So it's just like, do you think that this law is universally broken, or do you think this law is broken as it applies to you? That's what a vaccine was. They just changed the definition of vaccine. I don't think they did. That's my point. If you think they changed the definition of vaccine, I'm open for that argument. But you're going to have to provide a source. They're legally distinct per approval. In some senses, they are legally distinct, but they are the same substance. So there is a legal distinction in so much as there's a difference in sort of like the packaging and labeling, things like that. So there is that legal distinction, but there's no practical distinction. So it is different in so much as they're not doing it with the packaging and stuff, but it's the same stuff that they're being approved. So, on a practical level, it doesn't matter. It's not the same packaging, it's not the same labeling, but it's the same exact stuff. So kind of doesn't really matter on a material level. There is a legal distinction, but not one that really matters. To your point about that's what a vaccine was, Shawsharian fraud. I'm going to need you to prove that. Where is the definition you think changed? Please provide me a relevant authority. I'm open to this argument. I'm open to the authority. I'm open to the argument that the FDA, it would presumably be the FDA, but I'm open to the argument that the FDA or some other authority, but presumably the FDA changed the definition to meet this. I'm open to that possibility, but I'm going to need you to show your work. Where do you think the old definition is? Please, provide me a source. Where do you think it is? Do you think it's in the US code somewhere? Do you think it's in the CFR somewhere? Let me know. And then if it's changed, then we can argue about whether or not the change is a good change, because just because it changed doesn't mean that that's bad, but we can at least acknowledge it changed and go from there. So where are you getting authority for the old definition? Chaucer, like the author, Chaucerian fraud, fair enough. Sarah for definition control changed it. Provide sources. Where's the old definition? What is the old definition? I can look it up on Westlaw. I can look up every code ever in the history of time, any version of it. What do you think changed? CFR are the Code of Federal Regulations. Those are administrative law? Basically, yes. I thought it's also why they call it flu shot instead of influenza vaccine, because immunity provides wanes over the course of a year. I think flu shot is just a nickname for it. Influenza it is a vaccine. Yeah. So I mean, if you think the COVID-19 vaccine is not a vaccine, what is the definition of vaccine that you are applying? Where is it in the law that you think that they would change it? The act of introducing a vaccine into the body to produce immunity to a specific disease. Okay, where is that definition coming from? Where's that definition coming from? The act of introducing a vaccine in the body to produce immunity to a specific disease. Where's that coming from? I don't think the term vaccine has ever been defined in law. I'm not sure it has either. Only a word with generically understood definition. I mean, immunity wouldn't be really a correct definition because no vaccine ever has been 100% effective. So if the old definition in like the dictionary was that it had to provide immunity, then I mean that doesn't seem like a very good definition, because there's no vaccine ever that's been able to do that perfectly. So I think protection is probably a better definition. Flu shots are shooting individual viruses and killing them one by one. The flu shot is, because there's no one flu, just like there's no one common cold. So the flu shot is the best guess against which variants will be most active in a given year. So it only protects you against whatever variants are in that particular version. Also depends how you legally define immunity. That as well, right? What's the difference between an inoculation and a vaccine? I don't know. Smallpox vaccine eradicated perfectly. I'm not sure that's true. I mean, I would be doubtful that the smallpox vaccine worked 100% of the time. It worked enough that we were able to eliminate smallpox, but I don't think that means that the smallpox vaccine was perfect. It would surprise me a great deal if the smallpox vaccine was 100% effective. It doesn't have to be 100% effective in order to, because ultimately all you have to do is reduce the replication number below 1, right? That's all you have to do. As long as you do that, eventually it will stop existing because it's on a decreasing cycle. So all you have to do is keep the R number below 1 and you're there. So I seriously doubt the smallpox vaccine was 100% effective. That doesn't seem plausible. Inoculation is anything you can introduce the body through a needle. That sounds plausible. There is issues with allowing EUA. Excuse me. There's issues with allowing EUA to continue well with an approved vaccine on the market. You're correct. Goes against what the EUA is for. You're also correct. Considering we're past 6 months past fully approved, why they still use the EUA? I'm not sure they are using it. I'm just not sure that they're applying the standards for the packaging, because again, it's the same exact stuff. So I mean, it's in a different bottle with a different labeling and different packaging, but it's the same exact thing. So it's like calling a rose a rose. Would a rose by any other name smell sweet? So I'm not sure the EUA is still in effect. They just might be not really caring about the packaging because, that's not really the most important detail right now. Yeah, Pfizer has had it fully approved, but I think they are correct. I think they are correct in so much as to my knowledge, and this might be wrong, but I think they might be correct that in so much as there is a legal distinction between the EUA and the vaccine, and I believe it's correct, although it might not be true, that the vaccine that's actually being distributed is under the labeling of the EUA, right? Because all that stuff was actually manufactured before, right? So all the stuff was manufactured with the old labels and old packaging, and there's just no real particular reason to just change the packaging and labeling and stuff for the hell of it, right? It's the same exact stuff. So like, why bother on some level? I think is the idea, but I think they might be correct. Although that maybe has changed in the interim, I don't know because I'm not following it daily. But I do believe it was correct that for a long time and perhaps currently, the stuff that is currently being distributed is under the old sort of in the old sort of labeling and old sort of packaging, and isn't under the new labeling. So it's different in that legal respect. They're still using the EUA. It was renewed several months ago. That's interesting. That's interesting because EUA, my understanding of an EUA is it's not supposed to exist. It's only supposed to exist if there's no acceptable treatments, I think, although I'm not an expert on such things. So I think an EUA, although don't quote me on this, is only supposed to be used if there's no acceptable treatment. So it would be slightly surprising to me, therefore, if the EUA was renewed, because what would be the point? But did I see the study in Brazil with 130,000 participants in which the whole town that showed the horse pace? I don't know what you're talking about. I don't understand that. You can't find the stuff with the proper labeling. It's my understanding it's not being produced. If you call Pfizer about it, they'll state they're unavailable. Yeah, I'm not an expert on that. I don't know about that. And Americans says you're correct. They still put it through. It's illegal. It might be. I'm not an expert. I'm not an expert on the full implications of the emergency use authorization. So before I as a legal expert tell you that something is illegal or not, right, I'm going to want to be fairly sure. So that's why I'm couching my language a little bit, because I'm not sure. Like, this is all I can say is this is my understanding of an EUA. This is my understanding of the limitations of an EUA. So it doesn't quite make sense. But I'm not going to sit here as a legal education expert and tell you the FDA is in violation of law unless I know that and have looked it all the way through, because I want to be as accurate as I can be, right? So I don't know that. It might be true, but I'm not sure. You need to debate this with Attorney Barnes. He's working on these suits and disagrees. I am aware that he's working on these suits, and I'm aware that he disagrees. I'm not sure. I don't know. He might be right. I mean, he might be right. Maybe because I'm not going to sit here and contradict Robert Barnes unless I know, right? I don't know for sure, right? These are my understandings of the EUA. These are my understandings of its limitations. This is why it doesn't quite make sense. But I'm not going to sit here and tell you that the FDA is doing something legal or illegal unless I've done enough research. Robert Barnes has done more research on this issue. Robert Barnes might well be right. I'm certainly not in a position to contradict Robert Barnes. Maybe they are in violation of law. I don't know. I don't know for sure. So I'm not really in a position to debate him because I'm not informed enough to come in this with an informed enough opinion to say, well, Robert Barnes is wrong or that he's right. I don't know. But I know he's working on the issues, and so he might see some issues that present problems, and maybe he's right. So I'm not really sure it's worthy of a debate, or anything, because I just don't know for sure. I think I'm going to sign off for now because that's really all I had to say about that. Yeah, I like facts. That's important. I want to try to get it as right as I can. I want to try to get it as right as I can. That doesn't mean that I don't get it, that I get perfectly. But before I'm going to, contradict someone or not, I'd like to have at least a better knowledge of what's going on. I've disagreed with Robert Barnes in the past, and when I felt like I knew something, but I'm not sure now. Yeah. What happens with a law whenever something that's produced by common definition is changed? I don't understand your question. Are you asking me what happens if Congress passes a law with a specific definition of a term that's different than the common definition? If Congress passes a law with a specific definition, that's the definition now, for the purposes of that law, at least, right? I mean, Congress can define their terms, and if Congress defines a term, then that's what it means now, for the purposes of that statute, at least. I'm going to sign off for now. If you like these videos, please remember to give it a like. I hope you guys learned at least something about statutory interpretation and learned something about not overreading definitions and making sure to apply them in the context in which they're specified. So I hope you learned something at least in that sense. I hope you've been well. Until later, my friends, I hope all's well. Cheers and goodbye.